The champagne glass slipped from Noah Carter's hand and shattered against the marble floor, just inches from the woman who had once sworn she'd die for him. Now, dressed in diamond and pride, Tessa stood before him with the arrogance of a queen who believed she had conquered the world. Only 24 hours earlier, she had signed a $500 million contract, cameras flashing, reporters chanting her name. But tonight, in the same living room he'd built with his bare hands, she pointed to the door and said coldly, "You don't belong in my life anymore, Noah. I'm done living small." Noah didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just looked at her, long enough for her confidence to tremble, and whispered, "Be careful what you build, Tess. Some empires rest on sand." She laughed as the door closed behind him, unaware that the company that had just made her a star was his, and what he would do next would turn her world into ashes. The fluorescent lights of St. Joseph's Hospital had flickered above Noah years ago as he signed the final consent form. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of a man who had sold everything he owned to keep the woman he loved alive. 2 days earlier, the specialist had said the words that shattered him: ovarian failure, emergency surgery, immediate payment required. Without hesitation, Noah drove his sedan to a used car dealer and handed over the keys. The car that had carried him to his first job interview, their first date, and their wedding day was gone before sunset. When he returned to the hospital, Tessa lay pale beneath thin white sheets. She tried to smile when he kissed her forehead, whispering, "You shouldn't have sold it, Noah." He brushed her hair back gently. "It's only metal, Tess. Your flesh. You breathe." Her eyes glistened, but in that reflection was already a flicker of something else. A hunger that pain could not erase. A spark that belonged to someone who wanted more than survival. The surgery was successful. Noah spent every night beside her bed, sleeping in the narrow visitor's chair, feeding her soup, reading aloud articles about architectural design, the field she dreamed of conquering someday. When she could finally walk again, he pushed her wheelchair through the hospital's double doors into sunlight. "From here," he said softly, "we build again." And they did. In a cramped one-bedroom apartment overlooking the rail line, Noah worked nights repairing circuitry for local businesses, while Tessa drafted blueprints and proposals at their wobbly kitchen table. He built her website from scratch, uploaded her portfolios, designed the logo she adored, a golden compass inside a circle. When clients paid late, he covered the bills. When she doubted herself, he spoke faith into her lungs. Their evenings were quiet, filled with the hum of an old desktop fan and the scent of burnt coffee. To outsiders, they were inseparable, the devoted husband and the recovering dreamer. Yet beneath that harmony, Noah sometimes caught her staring out the window as trains rolled past, eyes distant, thoughts far beyond their shared struggle. He mistook that look for ambition. He never recognized it as restlessness. On their third anniversary, he handed her a modest silver necklace, the only gift he could afford. She smiled politely, thanked him, then returned to drafting another proposal before midnight. Noah kissed her shoulder and whispered, "Someday, one of those drawings will change everything." She didn't answer. At dawn, while Noah packed his toolbox for another day's work, Tessa stood at the mirror tracing the scar along her abdomen. Gratitude had faded. In its place grew a dangerous conviction that love without power was a prison. She wanted the skyline, the contracts, the world, and though she didn't know it yet, that hunger would soon demand a price far greater than the car Noah sold, or the vows they once believed unbreakable. Tessa's recovery brought back her strength, and with it, a restlessness that no amount of comfort could tame. The scar on her body had healed, but the one in her mind was widening. While Noah left each morning with his toolbox and grease-stained overalls, she spent her hours drafting architectural concepts that few local clients could afford. Their neighborhood buzzed with noise, hawkers shouting, engines humming, children running between narrow streets. But inside their small apartment, silence grew heavier by the day. At first, Noah thought it was fatigue. She would stare at the window as if watching something he couldn't see. He'd make jokes, pour her coffee, even play old jazz records to fill the space. But her laughter never lasted. She began sleeping later, scrolling through her phone long after midnight, reading articles about rising developers, city expansions, and luxury construction projects. Her world was slowly expanding, while Noah's remained the same. One evening, she received an email from Titan Infrastructure Holdings, a national conglomerate overseeing a series of smart road and bridge projects. They were seeking consultants for a pilot design. Tessa's hands trembled as she opened it. Her modest portfolio, which Noah had helped her upload, had caught someone's eye. That someone was Gavin Blake, Titan's senior manager for regional operations. His message was polite, flattering, and unmistakably personal. "I was impressed by your clean design logic," it read. "Your work carries vision. Let's meet to discuss how we might collaborate." Tessa read it 3 times before calling Noah. He was overjoyed, perhaps more than she was. "See, I told you your time would come," he said, spinning her in his arms. "This could change everything, Tess." He meant it sincerely. He believed success for her was success for them both. That night, he stayed up late helping her prepare her pitch deck, formatting slides, rehearsing the lines she would say. The meeting took place at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Gavin Blake arrived in a tailored gray suit, his confidence as sharp as his smile. He spoke less about contracts and more about her potential, her spark, the way she carried herself. His tone lingered between business and admiration. Tessa noticed. She also noticed the way waiters leaned when he snapped his fingers, how easily he paid for the wine without checking the bill. In the weeks that followed, Titan requested more proposals from her. Gavin's messages became warmer, his compliments bolder. "You're wasted in small projects, Tessa," he once wrote. "You should be handling city blocks, not living room remodels." She laughed at first, but each word stuck. Noah still worked nights, still returned home smelling of oil and iron. He would find her awake, typing reports under dim yellow light. She said it was work, but her phone always faced downward when he entered. When Titan announced the dinner for preferred contractors, Gavin personally invited her and told her to come alone. "It's a networking thing," he said. "Keep it professional, but don't be invisible." She told Noah it was business, kissed him on the cheek, and left in a navy blue gown he'd once bought her for their anniversary. He waited up that night, watching the clock, unaware that while he sat in the dark, the woman he loved was already crossing a line that no loyalty could ever restore. The night of the dinner had changed something invisible in Tessa Carter. She returned home late, her perfume mixed with a faint scent of wine and something unfamiliar, expensive, foreign, like ambition in liquid form. Noah was still awake, seated on the couch with the television off, pretending to read a manual. When she walked in, he smiled, relieved. "How did it go?" he asked. She hung her clutch on the hook and replied without looking at him. "It went well. They liked my concepts." Then she disappeared into the bathroom. When the water began to run, Noah sat quietly, staring at the door. For the first time, she hadn't said we. From that night, the rhythm of their lives changed. Tessa began attending more meetings, each one stretching later than the last. Her tone toward him softened only when she needed something. Documents typed, designs reviewed, expenses covered. She said Titan paid late. He believed her. He even borrowed against his savings to support her deadlines, thinking success only needed one final push. But success had already found her, through Gavin Blake. The first time they met outside the office, she told herself it was harmless. A cup of coffee, a shared frustration about bureaucracy. He told her she had fire, that men like Noah could never understand women built for greater things. She laughed nervously, pretending not to agree. But when his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. It began with texts, compliments disguised as encouragements, late-night calls about design revisions that always drifted toward personal talk. Gavin was older, calculating, and knew exactly how to make her feel seen. Tessa, flattered and terrified, tried to draw lines, but each conversation blurred them more. One night, after another of Titan's corporate gatherings, the inevitable happened. Wine, city lights, and the illusion of power consumed her. When she woke up beside Gavin the next morning, guilt stabbed her for only a second before pride swallowed it. Noah noticed the changes, the new phone password, the perfume he didn't recognize, the laughter she reserved for someone unseen. Still, he trusted her. When he asked if something was wrong, she smiled and said, "You worry too much." He told himself marriage went through phases. He didn't know this phase would be his undoing. Weeks turned into months. Gavin began using his influence to redirect Titan's smaller contracts to Tessa's firm. Her earnings multiplied. She moved her office to a higher floor, bought designer clothes on credit, and started speaking in a tone that no longer sounded like home. Noah celebrated every win with her, though he never saw any of the money. "It's all reinvestment," she'd say. Sometimes while she slept, Noah studied her face in the dim light and wondered if success always made people distant. He didn't know she was already planning a life that didn't include him. Gavin had whispered promises, a joint venture, luxury apartments, travel, even marriage, and every lie sank deeper than her wedding ring ever had. One evening when Noah reached for her hand, she pulled away gently. "I'm tired," she murmured. But the truth was simpler. She wasn't tired. She was gone. The woman who once cried in his arms at St. Joseph's Hospital no longer existed. In her place stood someone who believed loyalty was for the poor. Years before the dinners, the lies, and the long nights of deceit, there had been another secret that Tessa buried deep, a sin darker than her infidelity, a wound Noah never knew existed. It was the day she became a mother and a liar in the same breath. The storm that morning was merciless. Wind lashed against the hospital windows as nurses rushed through dim corridors. Tessa's labor had come 2 weeks early, while Noah was away on an engineering project out of town. He had begged her to wait for him, but babies choose their own time. When the pain tore through her, she screamed for help. Hours later, through exhaustion and fear, she brought a little girl into the world, tiny, pink, alive. But when she held the baby, all she could think of was the bills stacked on the kitchen counter and the future she couldn't afford. Noah's salary was barely covering rent, and the doctor had warned that her previous surgery left her body fragile. One more pregnancy might be her last. To her, that meant limitation, and Tessa Carter refused to be limited. The following morning, a woman approached her in the recovery ward, wealthy, elegant, with eyes full of desperate kindness. She and her husband had been trying for a child for years. They whispered offers through tears, words that sounded like salvation wrapped in sin. $50,000, enough to start a business, clear debts, chase dreams. Tessa's heart pounded. She asked herself if Noah would understand, if she could frame it as a tragedy later. The woman pressed the money into her trembling hands. "You can give her a better life," she said. That night, under the cover of thunder, Tessa signed false papers declaring a stillbirth. The baby was carried out of the ward swaddled in pink. When Noah returned the next morning, breathless and hopeful, she lay motionless on the bed. "She didn't make it," she whispered weakly. He sank to his knees, sobbing beside her, blaming fate. She turned her face toward the wall and pretended to weep, though her tears were for something else entirely. Weeks later, when Noah sold his car to pay for her surgery, Tessa's guilt nearly crushed her. But greed is clever. It speaks softly, calling itself survival. She tucked the memory away, convincing herself she'd done the right thing. The money launched her small firm, the logo Noah designed for her. It was paid for with the price of their unborn child. Years passed, and that secret slept beneath layers of ambition. But guilt has a heartbeat, faint and steady. Sometimes, when she looked at Noah as he slept beside her, peaceful, trusting, she felt that pulse quicken, like the faint cry of a baby she tried to forget. Now, as Titan's influence tightened around her, as Gavin whispered promises and contracts grew fatter, that old sin began to resurface in her dreams. In them, she was back in that storm, holding her child, torn between the life she sold and the empire she built on its blood. The baby's cry would echo through her mind, louder each time, as if reminding her that every empire has ghosts. And one day, hers would come calling. By the time Titan Infrastructure Holdings announced the government's new Smart Road initiative, Tessa had transformed from a struggling architect into one of the city's most promising developers. Her name appeared in business articles, interviews, and conference invitations. To the world, she was the embodiment of resilience. To Noah, she was still his wife, the same woman he had once pushed through hospital doors in a wheelchair, believing their love could outlast misfortune. He didn't know her success had come wrapped in deceit. Gavin Blake had greased every wheel to ensure her company, Carter Designs, rose above more qualified bidders. He'd falsified documents, redirected internal reports, and whispered in the right ears. When the award letter came, Carter Designs is hereby granted the $500 million Smart Road project. Tessa nearly collapsed in disbelief. Cameras flashed. Flash bulbs painted her face with triumph. She stood at the podium, Gavin in the audience, smiling like a man who owned her soul. That evening, she returned home trembling with excitement. Noah met her at the door. Still in his work overalls, a thin film of dust on his face. She held the envelope out to him. "Noah, we got it," she said, her voice shaking. $500 million. For a moment, he forgot his fatigue. He lifted her in his arms, spinning her as he laughed. "I told you you'd change the world," he said. She laughed too, but it sounded rehearsed. When he set her down, she looked around their small apartment, its peeling paint and low ceiling suddenly suffocating. They opened a bottle of cheap wine to celebrate. Noah toasted to her brilliance, to their journey, to everything ahead. But Tessa's mind was already elsewhere. At the press conference tomorrow, the mansion she'd seen online, the luxury car dealership Gavin had promised to visit with her. Noah's words faded like background noise. She stared at the window, seeing not their reflection but the glittering skyline she believed she finally deserved. Later that night, while Noah slept beside her, she scrolled through her phone, reading congratulatory messages from colleagues and one particularly bold one from Gavin. "We did it, Tess. You and I, partners in every sense." Her thumb hovered over the delete button, but instead she typed back, "Couldn't have done it without you." The next morning, Titan's CEO made the official announcement. Noah watched the broadcast from a small cafe, pride swelling in his chest. He noticed the company's logo on the backdrop and smiled. Titan Infrastructure. What he didn't know was that the company had recently changed management. Its founder, an aging investor who once mentored Noah, had quietly handed control to a private trust. Noah had been too busy fixing wires and scraping through bills to pay attention to corporate reshuffles. That night, while news channels replayed Tessa's smiling face, Noah texted her, "Proud of you, Tess. You earned this." She didn't reply. She was sitting beside Gavin in a limousine, sipping champagne, her phone face down on her lap. She looked out the tinted window at the city lights stretching ahead like an open kingdom. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. And somewhere in another part of that same city, the man she had built it all upon was still awake, writing her a note that said, "I'll drive you to the site tomorrow." He didn't yet know that his offer of support would be met with betrayal so sharp it would change him forever. The morning sunlight poured through their thin curtains, golden and cruel, as if mocking the peace Noah still believed in. He woke early, ironed his work shirt, and brewed coffee strong enough to fight the fatigue from another sleepless night. Tessa had come home past midnight, wearing a black satin gown and a smile that didn't belong to him. She hadn't said much, only mumbled something about post-contract dinner. Noah had nodded and told her he was proud. Now as he set 2 mugs on the table, she emerged from the bedroom in a crisp beige suit, hair pulled tight, perfume sharp enough to cut through the air. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from people congratulating her, and one from Gavin, flashing briefly on the screen before she tilted it away. Noah smiled, holding out a cup. "Big day again?" he asked softly. She didn't look at him. "I have a press meeting with Titan," she replied flatly. "After that, lunch with investors. Don't wait up." He nodded, trying to hide the sting. "I thought maybe we'd drive to the site together, see where the smart roads will begin. You know, for luck." She turned then, her eyes cold, voice calm. "Noah, you don't have to be involved in everything I do." It was the tone, not angry, just dismissive, that made him set the cup down slowly. He searched her face for the woman who once clung to him in hospital corridors, the woman who called him her miracle. But the glint in her eyes now was something else. Superiority. the kind that comes when love becomes an inconvenience. Hours passed. By evening, Noah returned from work and found her seated in the living room surrounded by suitcases. His heart stumbled. "What's going on?" She looked up, calm, like someone rehearsing lines she'd long prepared. "Noah, I've been thinking," she began, crossing her legs. "You and I are different people now. I've worked too hard to stay small. I need space, new direction, new environment. I'll send you some money so you can start over." He blinked, confused. "Start over? Tess, what are you talking about?" Her voice hardened. "I'm saying I can't do this anymore. You're kind, but kindness doesn't build empires. I need a man who moves forward, not one who fixes broken wires." Something inside him broke quietly. He didn't yell, didn't beg. He only looked around the apartment, the framed photo from their wedding, the old drawing pinned on the wall, the coffee mug still warm. Every memory suddenly felt counterfeit. He stood there a long moment, then nodded once. "If that's what you want," he said softly, "then I won't stop you." She looked relieved, almost victorious. As he walked to the door, she added, "I'll make sure you're taken care of, Noah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He turned, eyes steady. "Be careful what you build, Tess. Some empires rest on sand." Then he stepped out, closing the door behind him. She exhaled deeply, mistaking his calm for weakness. Outside, the sound of his fading footsteps vanished into the city's hum. Inside, she poured herself a drink, toasting silently to her freedom, unaware that the empire she thought she'd built stood on ground he owned. Rain fell that night, thin and relentless, washing the city in silver streaks as Noah Carter sat alone in his car, parked on a quiet street outside the Titan Infrastructure headquarters. He hadn't planned to come here. Something inside him had just pulled. The building towered above him. Glass, steel, and power, all things Tessa had chased. All things he once dreamed of creating before life turned him into a man who worked with his hands instead of leading with his mind. He sat there for hours, watching the reflection of his own face in the windshield. Calm, empty, unreadable. Then his phone buzzed. It was an email from an old mentor, Richard Langston, founder of Titan. The subject line, "It's time, Noah." Richard had been Noah's closest friend since college, the man who'd given him his first real opportunity years earlier. Titan Infrastructure had started as their shared vision, before Noah sold his shares quietly to fund Tessa's surgery in her company. What she never knew, what no one outside a small circle did, was that Richard had bought those shares in trust under Noah's name. When Richard retired 2 weeks ago, his final act was transferring controlling ownership, 61% of Titan, to Noah Carter. Noah hadn't even opened the transfer file yet. He'd been too broken by Tessa's betrayal. But now, under the hum of rain and streetlight, he clicked the document. The seal of Titan Infrastructure glowed at the top. His name beneath it. Noah Alexander Carter, Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder. He exhaled slowly, eyes closing, as realization struck. The $500 million contract that had turned Tessa into a public sensation had been signed under his company's authority. The woman who threw him out of their home had built her empire on his foundation. For a long while, Noah said nothing. Then quietly, he began to plan. The next morning, he met with his legal advisor, an unassuming woman named Leah Morris. "I want a full private audit of Titan's regional operations," he said. "Everything Gavin Blake has touched, trace it, verify it, and document it. Discreetly?" Leah frowned slightly. "Internal concern?" "Personal," he replied, "but keep it clean. I want truth, not noise." Within a week, the first report arrived. It was worse than he'd imagined. Falsified proposals, hidden wire transfers, unapproved contracts, all tied to Gavin Blake's name and indirectly to Tessa's firm. Leah's team uncovered emails between them, encrypted, intimate, incriminating. They had used their affair as leverage to secure government approvals. Noah felt no rage, only a strange calm, like the silence before an explosion. But the next document shattered what little heart he had left. Among hospital archives, Leah found something buried deeper. Medical files from 11 years earlier showing a live birth record for baby girl Carter, delivered at St. Mary's Hospital under Tessa's maiden name, marked later as adopted. Noah stared at the paper for a long time, unable to breathe. The child he had mourned, the daughter he believed died, was alive, somewhere out there. He closed the file and whispered to himself, "She took everything." His voice didn't rise. It fell into stillness, the kind that carries decisions instead of anger. He leaned back in his chair, the city skyline glimmering through Titan's high-rise windows behind him. The time for heartbreak was over. The time for calculation had begun. The morning Titan's internal review concluded, the entire boardroom sat in a tension thick enough to silence even the sound of the rain outside. Noah Carter stood at the head of the glass table, the company logo gleaming behind him. Every executive there knew of him. Few had ever seen him in charge. To them, he was the quiet investor Richard Langston trusted. None realized until that moment that he now held absolute control. "Mr. Carter," Leah Morris began, sliding a sealed folder across the table, "the audit findings confirm gross misconduct within the regional contracting department. Gavin Blake approved multiple deals without clearance, including a $500 million award to Carter Designs." Noah opened the folder but didn't glance inside. He already knew every page by heart. "Proceed according to policy," he said simply. "Terminate the contract. Freeze all related disbursements. Begin legal review." The board exchanged wary glances. One director cleared his throat. "Sir, Carter Designs is currently the face of Titan's Smart Road initiative. Voiding that contract could draw political backlash." Noah's gaze was steady. "Then let it draw. Integrity isn't negotiable." By noon, a formal termination notice was dispatched to Carter Designs. The justification: conflict of interest, breach of corporate ethics, and failure to disclose relationships with Titan staff. In the same breath, Gavin Blake's company credentials were suspended pending investigation. Across the city, in her luxury office lined with congratulatory bouquets, Tessa read the email and felt her blood turn cold. Her assistant rushed in, panicked. "Ma'am, Titan just terminated the contract." Tessa's phone rang. Gavin. She answered sharply. "What's happening? Fix this." His voice was shaky. "Someone's reopened the audit. The new CEO, Carter, he's tightening everything. I can't stop it." "Carter?" she repeated, stunned. "Noah." No, someone named Noah Carter. Wait, hold on." Gavin's words stumbled into silence. "Tessa, that's your husband?" Her heart stuttered. "Ex-husband," she hissed, "and he's nobody." Gavin didn't respond. That night, Titan released an internal statement confirming the suspension of 2 major contracts and the investigation of multiple senior officials. News agencies picked it up instantly. Social media flared with speculation. Massive fraud at Titan. Anonymous whistleblower exposes internal corruption. Tessa barely slept. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every news headline carried her company's name. She called Titan repeatedly, only to be redirected or ignored. The next morning, when she arrived at their headquarters, the receptionist told her coldly, "Mr. Carter isn't receiving visitors." She froze. Mr. Carter. The words echoed in her mind like thunder. Meanwhile, in his office above, Noah watched her through the tinted glass wall of the lobby camera feed. She stood there in her designer suit, demanding to be seen, unaware that every humiliation she was enduring had been chosen for her. He felt no joy, only finality. Later that afternoon, Gavin was summoned to HR under the pretense of a compliance review. 30 minutes later, security escorted him out, ID revoked, laptop confiscated, his name scrubbed from the staff portal. By evening, the media storm had grown louder. Reporters gathered outside Carter Designs' office, flashing cameras at Tessa's car as she pushed through the doors. Her staff whispered. Investors withdrew. Contracts crumbled like sandcastles under the tide. In his penthouse, Noah poured himself a glass of water, watching the city lights flicker. Phase 1 was complete. The empire she built on deceit had just lost its foundation. And in the silence of that night, he whispered to himself, "She'll learn, slowly." The fallout spread faster than wildfire. Within 72 hours, the story dominated business headlines. Titan cancels $500 million contract amid corruption probe. CEO Noah Carter launches internal cleanup. Carter designs under scrutiny. The same media that had once called Tessa a rising star now called her a fraud. Cameras parked outside her gated driveway. Microphones shoved through her car window as she sped past flashing lights. Inside the mansion Gavin had helped her rent, she paced barefoot across the marble floor, her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from panicked investors, terminated clients, and a few fake friends who wanted to check in. Gavin sat slouched on the couch, unshaven, his arrogance gone. He had received a legal notice from Titan's compliance department earlier that morning. Fraud, bribery, and violation of fiduciary conduct. His accounts were frozen, his car repossessed, his world collapsing. "This can't be happening," Tessa muttered, voice trembling. "You said we were safe, Gavin. You promised." He didn't answer. He just rubbed his temples and said quietly, "I think he knows." "Who knows?" Gavin met her eyes. "Your husband, Noah Carter. He's not just the CEO. He owns Titan." The words struck her harder than any slap. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Noah's an electrician. He fixes machines." Gavin gave a humorless laugh. "Maybe once, but not anymore. Every document I've seen since the audit, his signature is at the top. He's the one pulling the strings now." Tessa's knees nearly gave out. Her mind raced back to the day she'd thrown him out, the way he'd stood in the doorway and said, "Be careful what you build, Tess." She had laughed then. Now it echoed like a curse. Meanwhile, Noah's revenge deepened. Through corporate channels, he activated a dormant clause in Carter Design's original registration, the one he'd signed years ago when he helped her file the paperwork. The clause granted him 60% control of the company in the event of an ethics violation or dissolution of marriage. She had never read the fine print. She just begged him to sign quickly back then. Now it was her undoing. By nightfall, her business accounts were frozen. Her office was sealed under legal order. Her credit cards declined at a restaurant the next day when she tried to buy lunch. She stormed outside and screamed into her phone, calling every contact she knew. No one picked up. Gavin's lawyer stopped answering too. His family had abandoned him. His name was poisoned now. When she returned home that evening, she found a black SUV parked by the gate. Two men stepped out, state financial investigators. "Mrs. Carter," one said firmly, "we have a warrant to seize company assets related to Titan's Smart Road project." She stood motionless as they walked past her, loading documents, computers, and even the awards she had displayed in her living room into boxes. Her empire, the one she built on deceit and pride, was being carried away piece by piece. Up in his office at Titan, Noah watched the report on the evening news. The camera caught her face, an ashen, panicked, still trying to hold her head high as reporters shouted questions. He turned the volume down and stared out the window. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel this quiet, this empty, but the calm was necessary. There was still more to come. He opened a folder labeled Private Evidence, Confidential. Inside were DNA test results for the 3 children Tessa had claimed were his. All 3 marked the same. No biological relationship detected. He closed the folder and whispered, "Now she'll know what loss really means." The envelope arrived on a Friday morning, slipped under the mansion door by a courier who refused to wait for a signature. It bore no logo, no return address, only Tessa's name written in a familiar, deliberate hand. She tore it open with trembling fingers, expecting a summons or another financial notice. What she found inside was far worse. 3 sheets of paper, each one printed with a name and a laboratory seal, and beneath every name a single sentence. No biological relationship detected. Her breath caught. The room spun. She sank to her knees on the polished floor, clutching the papers as if they might rewrite themselves. "Noah," she whispered, her voice breaking. The world around her began to tilt, memories flashing like shattered glass. The children, the lies, the nights with Gavin that she had convinced herself were harmless. All of it. She stumbled into the living room, where Gavin sat staring blankly at the television, his face gray from sleepless nights. "You did this!" she screamed, hurling the papers at him. "You ruined everything! They were yours!" He picked one up, scanned the result, and froze. What are you talking about? He said hoarsely. I never... Don't you dare lie to me, she shouted, her voice cracking. No one knows Gavin. He knows about us, about the contracts, about everything. He's destroying us. Gavin dropped the paper, realization dawning like a slow, cruel sunrise. If he knows, he murmured, we're finished. Tessa's fury turned to panic. Then fix it. Do something. He laughed bitterly. I can't fix what we destroyed. That night, as rain lashed the windows, Tessa sat in darkness. The papers spread before her like headstones. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, not as the ambitious woman chasing dreams, but as the architect of her own ruin. Every choice had been a transaction. Love for wealth, truth for power, family for fame. And now the invoice was due. Across town, Noah sat in his penthouse. The same results spread on his desk. He didn't drink. He didn't smile. He just stared at them, tracing the printed lines with a steady hand. 3 children, he whispered, none of them mine. The words didn't sting anymore. They just settled into the quiet space where his love for her used to live. Leah Morris entered, carrying another file. We found her, she said softly. Noah looked up. Who? Your daughter, the one from St. Mary's. He stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Where? A family in Franklin Ridge. The adoption was private, but our team confirmed everything. They raised her well. She's 11 now. They call her Hope. Noah's voice faltered for the first time. Hope! He sat down again, breathing hard. After a long silence, he said, Begin the process. I want her home. That weekend, while Tessa drowned in scandal and Gavin packed his last suitcase, Noah stood in a quiet park across town, watching a young girl with bright eyes chase bubbles through the afternoon air. Her laughter rang like something pure, untouched by deceit. When their eyes met, something ancient and wordless passed between them. He didn't tell her who he was, not yet. But in that moment, Noah Carter, once broken, once betrayed, felt the first spark of life return. The revenge had begun as justice, but now it had found purpose. He would reclaim what was his. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. Reporters, cameras, murmuring spectators, all waiting for the story that had gripped the city for weeks. Titan infrastructure scandal. CEO faces former wife and manager in court. Tessa stood near the entrance, wrists trembling, a pale shadow of the woman who once smiled for magazine covers. Her hair, once perfectly styled, now hung limp. The black suit she wore looked borrowed, heavy on her shoulders. Beside her, Gavin Blake adjusted his tie with shaking hands. They avoided each other's eyes. When the courtroom doors opened, Noah walked in quietly, flanked by attorneys. No arrogance, no triumph, just the calm presence of a man who no longer had anything to prove. His gaze swept briefly toward Tessa, but he didn't linger. She tried to meet his eyes to find something familiar in them, but what she saw was colder than anger, indifference. The hearing began with the prosecution outlining the charges: corporate fraud, bribery, forgery, and child trafficking. The last tied to the illegal sale of their newborn daughter over a decade ago. Every word hit Tessa like a blade. The courtroom lights seemed harsher than sunlight, exposing every lie she'd ever told. When evidence began to play on the monitors, emails between her and Gavin, secret wire transfers, falsified documents, she felt the ground shifting beneath her. Each exhibit was a confession she hadn't written, but had lived. Gavin's lawyer tried to object, claiming manipulation, but the judge silenced him. Then the investigator took the stand and produced the final piece. Hospital records proving that baby girl Carter had been sold to a private couple through an unlicensed broker. The courtroom fell silent. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth as her knees buckled. She whispered, "No!" Not out of denial, but because the truth sounded unbearable when spoken aloud. The prosecutor continued, "Mr. Noah Carter, through legal channels, has since reclaimed the child. The adoption has been nullified by court order." Gasps rippled through the room. Tessa's head jerked up, eyes wide. You found her?" she stammered, voice cracking. "She's alive?" For the first time, Noah turned toward her. His voice was low, controlled. "Alive, and free from everything you sold her into." Tessa collapsed onto the bench, sobbing uncontrollably. Gavin just stared ahead, frozen, realizing that his alliance with her had not only destroyed his career, but ended his life as he knew it. The judge's verdict came swift and sharp. Both guilty on multiple counts. 25 years imprisonment each, with no parole for the first 15. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. As marshals led them away, Tessa turned one last time toward Noah. Her voice broke into a whisper. "Please, you can't do this." He looked at her for a long moment and said, "I didn't do this, Tess. You did." When the doors closed behind her, Noah stood still, the cameras flashing again. This time not for scandal, but for justice. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He only exhaled, a man who had buried both love and rage in the same grave. Outside, the rain began to fall again, washing the courthouse steps clean. Somewhere across town, an 11-year-old girl sat by a window reading, waiting for the man who had promised to come for her. The sun was setting behind Titan's new headquarters, its golden reflection spilling across the glass facade like a quiet benediction. Months had passed since the verdict. The storm that once consumed Noah Carter's life had finally gone silent, leaving behind a calm too heavy to be called peace, but not painful enough to be called grief. He stood on the rooftop terrace, the city stretching beneath him, streets he'd wired, buildings he'd designed, systems he'd once repaired just to make rent. Everything looked smaller now, distant, like a world he had already outgrown. Beside him stood a young girl, her hair tied in a neat braid, her curious eyes scanning the skyline. Hope. She was shy at first, the day he'd come to meet her, uncertain of who he was, why the kind couple who raised her cried as they hugged goodbye. But children sense truth quicker than adults. When Noah knelt and whispered, "I'm your father," she didn't question. She only reached out and touched his cheek as if confirming something her heart already knew. Now she tugged gently at his sleeve. "Is that your building?" she asked, pointing at Titan's glowing sign. "Ours," he said softly. "One day, if you want it." She smiled, and the sound of her laughter carried across the terrace like wind chimes. Down below, life continued. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried home, and news outlets had moved on to fresher scandals. Gavin Blake had been transferred to a federal facility, his appeals denied. Tessa, stripped of her titles and fortune, served her sentence in a state penitentiary. She wrote once, one long letter filled with apologies, confessions, and regret. Noah read it in silence, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer he never opened again. Forgiveness was not something he owed her. Understanding, perhaps, but never absolution. He glanced at the skyline again, thinking of how easily love can become blindness. He had given her everything once, time, trust, even his future, and she had traded it for glitter that melted under rain. Yet without her betrayal, he might never have found his daughter. Without the pain, he might never have remembered who he truly was. Hope leaned her head against his arm. "Daddy," she said softly, "was Mommy a bad person?" He hesitated. The evening breeze lifted a strand of her hair. "No," he said finally. "She just forgot what good looked like." "Will she remember?" He looked toward the horizon. Some people remember too late. They stood there quietly until the city lights began to twinkle. Then Noah took her hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." As they walked toward the elevator, the reflection of father and daughter shimmered against the glass wall. Two silhouettes rising above a city built on betrayal and reborn through truth. Reporters had once asked him if he regretted what he did, if revenge had been worth it. He never answered publicly, but tonight, as he looked down at his child's small hand wrapped around his, he finally knew. Some storms don't destroy you. They wash away the people who were never real. And in that quiet golden dusk, Noah Carter smiled, not as the man who won, but as the man who survived.